No one loves the man whom he fears. Oldest wisdom. From the moment we are born, we cry out for connection. This is not merely a cry for food or warmth, but a fundamental recognition that we are incomplete on our own. Look around you, in every corner of the world. Humans gather. We form families, communities, societies. We create systems of governance, unwritten social contracts, and elaborate networks of exchange. Why? Because it is written into the very fabric of our nature. The phrase political animal might evoke images of campaign rallies or legislative debates, but its meaning runs far deeper. To be political is to recognize that your existence is inherently bound to others, that your fulfillment is tied to the collective. A human in true isolation is not merely lonely. They are diminished, unable to realize their full potential. Consider the child raised without adequate human interaction. Studies of orphanages, where infants received only basic physical care but minimal human touch or conversation, reveal devastating consequences. Developmental delays, inability to form attachments, and profound cognitive limitations. We require connection not as a luxury, but as a necessity, as essential as the air we breathe. Lesson 1. Man is by nature a political animal. Throughout history, one of the most severe punishments societies devised was exile, a recognition that to be cast out from the community was a fate sometimes worse than death. The isolated human is not fully human at all. Even those who retreat to mountaintops or isolated cabins carry with them the language, ideas, and social imprints of the communities that shape them. Our political nature manifests not just in formal governance, but in the microscopic negotiations of daily life. Watch children on a playground creating rules for their games, establishing hierarchies, forming alliances. They do this instinctively, without instruction. By age 5, children have already developed sophisticated understandings of fairness, reciprocity, and social organization. The building blocks of political thought. The structures we create, from village councils to global institutions, are external manifestations of this internal reality. When these structures align with our political nature, societies flourish. When they contradict it, tensions inevitably arise. The most successful societies throughout history have been those that understood this fundamental aspect of human nature and created systems that channeled it productively. You feel this truth in your bones when you experience the profound satisfaction of being part of something larger than yourself. A family celebration, a community project, a national movement. That sense of belonging and purpose isn't incidental to happiness. It's central to it. The most fulfilled among us are rarely those with the most individual resources, but those with the richest connections. Even in our digital age, where physical isolation is increasingly possible, we see this political nature expressing itself. People separated by oceans find each other online, forming communities around shared interests, beliefs, or challenges. The platforms change, but the underlying human need remains constant. The recognition of our political nature carries profound implications for how you might approach your life. If connection is fundamental to your being, then investing in meaningful relationships isn't a luxury. It's essential infrastructure. Building bridges between yourself and others, participating in collective endeavors, finding your place within communities. These aren't just pleasant activities, but vital expressions of your humanity. The most profound loneliness isn't being alone, but being disconnected. Surrounded by people yet feeling no genuine bond. This explains why someone can feel isolated in a crowded city, yet fulfilled in a small village where authentic connections exist. The quality of our political associations matters as much as their existence. Let us not mistake our political nature for mere gregariousness. It runs deeper. It encompasses our need to organize collectively, to establish systems of justice, to determine how resources are distributed and decisions made. Even the hermit in the wilderness relies on political frameworks. the land rights that protect their solitude, the social agreements that allow them to live unmolested. Your freedom, paradoxically, exists not in isolation but in the context of communal structures. True liberty isn't the absence of constraints, but the presence of just and beneficial ones. Collectively determined, the person who rejects all social bonds doesn't find freedom but a different kind of imprisonment. Understanding yourself as a political animal means recognizing that your well-being is inextricably linked with the well-being of others. It suggests that the path to self-improvement cannot be entirely self-contained but must engage with the communities that shape and sustain you. The truly wise person doesn't seek to escape this reality, but to embrace it, to find their proper place within the human constellation. Lesson 2. All men by nature desire knowledge. From the moment we draw our first breath, an insatiable curiosity propels us forward. Watch a child's eyes widen at the sight of a butterfly, their tiny fingers reaching out to touch, to know, to understand. This primal hunger for knowledge isn't taught. It's woven into our very essence. The spark of wonder that illuminates a child's face is the same flame that has driven humanity's greatest discoveries. Think about how you felt when you first grasped a difficult concept, when understanding finally dawned after confusion. That rush of satisfaction, that moment of clarity, it's no accident that we find it deeply rewarding. Our brains are literally wired to seek knowledge, releasing dopamine when we learn something new, treating discovery as a form of nourishment as essential as food or water. This desire manifests differently across people, but it remains universally present. Some pursue formal education, devouring textbooks and academic journals. Others learn through direct experience, letting curiosity guide them through landscapes of trial and error. Some seek knowledge of concrete things, how engines work or plants grow, while others explore abstract realms of philosophy, mathematics, or art. The paths vary wildly, but the underlying drive remains constant. Knowledge is more than mere survival advantage. It's freedom. Consider how differently you move through the world once you understand it. When you grasp the principles governing a situation, fear diminishes and possibility expands. The person who understands how markets function navigates economic uncertainty with confidence. The one who comprehends human psychology forms deeper connections with others. Knowledge doesn't just feed curiosity. It liberates us from the prison of ignorance. Throughout history, this quest for understanding has transformed not just people but entire civilizations. The ancient libraries of Alexandria weren't built on obligation but on recognition of this fundamental human longing. The Renaissance blossomed, not through force, but by awakening this natural desire after centuries of dormancy. Each scientific revolution, artistic movement, and technological leap forward testifies to this unquenchable thirst. Yet our relationship with knowledge is complicated. The same curiosity that drives discovery can lead us down paths of distraction. In today's world, we're bombarded with information designed to capture our attention rather than deepen understanding. The challenge isn't accessing knowledge. It's discerning which knowledge truly matters, which information transforms rather than merely entertains. Real knowledge integration requires effort. Your mind instinctively reaches for what's new, but requires discipline to properly absorb it. This explains why passive consumption often leaves you feeling empty, despite being technically informed. True learning demands engagement, questioning assumptions, connecting ideas, applying concepts to your lived experience. When you actively participate in knowledge acquisition, the satisfaction runs deeper, lasts longer. The most fulfilling knowledge often comes when you follow your authentic curiosities, rather than external expectations. Notice which questions naturally arise in your mind, which topics draw you back repeatedly. These internal signals often point toward knowledge that will prove most meaningful to your particular life. The mathematician who loses track of time-solving equations, the gardener who delights in understanding soil composition, the historian absorbed in ancient texts. Each follows a unique tributary of this universal human current. Knowledge also binds us together. When you share what you've learned, you participate in humanity's greatest collaborative project. Each discovery builds upon countless others, forming an unbroken chain stretching back to our earliest ancestors. Even as knowledge empowers people, it simultaneously connects us to something larger than ourselves. What you seek to know reveals what you value. Do you pursue knowledge that deepens your understanding of others, that helps you alleviate suffering, that builds rather than destroys? Or do you chase information that merely confirms existing beliefs, that separates rather than unites? The direction of your curiosity matters as much as its intensity. This natural desire for knowledge isn't just a fact about humanity, it's an invitation. To live well is to honor this fundamental aspect of your nature, to cultivate wonder in a world that often rushes past it, to transform information into wisdom through thoughtful integration. When you embrace your innate hunger for understanding, you don't just satisfy a craving. You become more fully human. Lesson 3. There was never a genius without a tincture of madness. Throughout history, those who have changed the world most profoundly have often danced on the edge of madness. Consider the curious case of Nikola Tesla, who fell madly in love with a pigeon in his later years, claiming it was the love of his life. The same mind that revolutionized our understanding of electricity found companionship in a bird with glowing eyes. At least according to his perception. Was this the ravings of a deteriorating mind, or simply the natural extension of a consciousness that never operated within conventional boundaries? The ancient Greeks understood this paradox intimately. They spoke of divine madness as a gift from the gods, a form of inspiration that transcended ordinary thinking. Their oracles, seized by trance, like states, delivered wisdom thought to come directly from Apollo himself. What appears as madness to the conventional observer might actually be an expanded awareness, a different way of processing reality that allows for insights invisible to the rational mind alone. Think of Vincent van Gogh, whose mental torment was inseparable from his artistic genius. In the swirling stars of his night skies, we see both beauty and pain, the manifestation of a mind experiencing reality with an intensity most cannot bear. He once wrote, "I put my heart and soul into my work and have lost my mind in the process." This wasn't mere poetic license, it was his lived reality. The connection between genius and madness isn't merely anecdotal. Research consistently shows that creative people score higher on measures of psychopathology than the general population. The same cognitive patterns that enable breakthrough thinking, loose associations, divergent thinking, heightened sensitivity, can, when amplified, manifest as symptoms we label as mental illness. The line between brilliant insight and delusion can be remarkably thin. Consider how genius often requires breaking free from conventional thinking. Einstein visualized himself riding on a beam of light, a thought experiment that appears whimsical or even absurd. Yet this mad visualization led to the theory of relativity. His willingness to entertain what others would dismiss as impossible thoughts was precisely what enabled his breakthrough. When you refuse to be constrained by what everyone knows to be true, you will inevitably appear at least somewhat mad to those around you. Society has always maintained an ambivalent relationship with its exceptional minds. We celebrate their contributions while often rejecting their eccentricities. Galileo was forced to recant his astronomical discoveries by authorities who couldn't accommodate his revolutionary perspective. Alan Turing, whose genius helped defeat Nazi Germany, was persecuted for his homosexuality. How many brilliant insights have been lost because we couldn't tolerate the unconventional packaging they came in? This pattern extends beyond science and art. In business, Steve Jobs was once ousted from the very company he founded, partly because his uncompromising vision and difficult personality alienated those around him. Yet this same intensity of focus and unwillingness to settle for mediocrity ultimately transformed multiple industries. His reality distortion field, a kind of functional delusion, pushed people to achieve what they believed impossible. Perhaps we should reconsider how we view the relationship between madness and exceptional thinking. Rather than seeing them as unfortunate companions, we might recognize them as different manifestations of the same underlying cognitive patterns. The price of seeing what others cannot see may be experiencing what others do not experience, both the sublime and the terrifying. What does this mean for you? It suggests that your most valuable insights might emerge from what others perceive as your strangest thoughts. Those moments when your mind makes connections that seem odd or irrational may contain the seeds of your greatest contributions. Instead of immediately dismissing such thoughts, learn to examine them with curious detachment. Not all unusual thoughts are brilliant, but almost all brilliant thoughts begin as unusual. You need not cultivate madness to access genius, but you must be willing to temporarily suspend the comfortable constraints of conventional thinking. Create space in your life for productive eccentricity, time when you allow your mind to wander without immediate judgment or practical constraint. The most powerful insights often arise, not when we're straining for solutions, but when we're allowing our minds to play. What appears as madness in one era may be recognized as genius in another. Your unusual perspectives might not be flaws to be corrected, but gifts to be refined. In embracing the strange corners of your own mind, you might discover exactly what the world needs, but doesn't yet know it's missing. Lesson 4. We become just by performing just action. There is a profound truth hiding in plain sight within our daily lives. We are not born with fully formed character, but rather, we become what we repeatedly do. This ancient insight carries more weight today than ever before. Consider the pianist who practices scales for hours until her fingers flow across the keys without conscious thought, or the basketball player whose countless free throws transform into muscle memory when the game is on the line. The same principle governs our moral development. You cannot think your way to justice. You cannot merely study what justice means and expect to embody it. To become just, you must perform just actions, consistently, deliberately, and habitually. This truth extends to all virtues. Courage develops through brave acts, temperance through measured responses, and wisdom through thoughtful decisions. There is no shortcut, no theoretical understanding that can replace the lived experience of virtue in action. Think about learning to ride a bicycle. No amount of reading about balance, momentum, and pedaling will prepare you for the actual experience. You must get on the bike, fall a few times, and keep trying until your body understands what your mind cannot fully explain. Virtue works the same way. You don't become honest by understanding the concept of honesty. You become honest by telling the truth even when it's difficult, again and again, until honesty becomes your natural response. This insight challenges our modern obsession with knowledge acquisition over practical application. We have universities full of ethics courses, yet scandals erupt regularly among the most educated circles. Why? Because knowing what is right and doing what is right are separated by a chasm that only practice can bridge. The lawyer who studies justice but bills dishonestly, the doctor who understands compassion but treats patients callously, the teacher who preaches respect but humiliates students, all demonstrate this fundamental disconnect. Neuroscience now confirms what ancient wisdom proposed. Our brains physically change through repeated action. When you consistently make just decisions, your neural pathways strengthen, making similar decisions easier in the future. Psychologists call this moral automaticity, the ability to respond virtuously without exhausting mental deliberation. This is why character feels so natural once developed. It's literally wired into your brain. Consider the implications for raising children. We often tell children to be good without giving them opportunities to practice goodness. We lecture about sharing rather than creating situations where sharing becomes habitual. True moral education requires opportunities for virtuous action, not merely instruction about virtuous concepts. The child who regularly helps others doesn't need constant reminders to be kind. Kindness becomes part of who they are. The same principle applies to rehabilitating those who have gone astray. Prison systems that focus solely on punishment miss the opportunity to help people practice new patterns of behavior. The most successful rehabilitation programs involve consistent practice of responsibility, empathy, and self-discipline. People don't change by simply regretting past actions. They change by building new habits of virtue. This understanding also illuminates why moral growth is often painful. Just as the athlete's muscles ache during training, your character develops through challenge. The first few times you stand up against injustice, speak an uncomfortable truth, or sacrifice for others will feel difficult, even unnatural. But with each repetition, the virtue becomes more integrated into your identity. You cannot separate who you are from what you do. Your character isn't some hidden essence waiting to be discovered. It's being forged in every choice you make. This is both sobering and liberating. Sobering because it means you cannot claim to value justice while consistently acting unjustly. Liberating because it means no matter your past, you can begin building virtue through your actions today. The path to becoming just, brave, or wise isn't mysterious or available only to the specially gifted. It's available to anyone willing to practice these virtues consistently. Start small. Be truthful in minor matters. Show courage in everyday situations. Exercise restraint in small temptations. These seemingly insignificant actions compound over time, gradually transforming your character from the outside in. In a world obsessed with appearances and quick fixes, remember this timeless truth. We become just by performing just action, temperate by performing temperate actions, brave by performing brave action. Your character is being shaped not by what you know, believe, or intend, but by what you repeatedly do. Choose your actions wisely, for they are silently determining who you are becoming. Lesson 5. The generality of men are naturally apt to be swayed by fear. In the quiet stillness of your own mind, consider what truly motivates your actions. Is it the aspiration toward virtue, or the simple fear of consequences? Most will discover, if honest with themselves, that fear exerts a profound influence on human behavior, often more compelling than reverence for what is good. The streets of Athens taught this lesson long ago, as citizens observed how quickly laws could maintain order, not through respect for their wisdom, but through dread of punishment. This primal reaction resides deep within our nature. We recoil from potential harm before we embrace potential good. A child learns not to touch fire first because it hurts, only later because understanding the properties of flame represents wisdom. But herein lies our fundamental limitation. When fear becomes our primary motivator, we develop minds constrained by boundaries rather than inspired by possibilities. The merchant who conducts fair business merely to avoid legal troubles never experiences the transcendent satisfaction of justice for its own sake. The citizen who helps others only to avoid social contempt misses the profound connection that comes from genuine compassion. Fear creates obedience, but not excellence. It produces compliance, not creativity. Most troublingly, it destroys the foundation of trust upon which all meaningful human connections must be built. Think of the ruler who governs through intimidation. He may maintain order, but his subjects develop a particular kind of calculation. They obey in his presence and subvert in his absence. They flatter to his face while harboring resentment in their hearts. No genuine loyalty can grow in soil poisoned by fear. You can observe this in even the smallest authorities. The household where children behave only when punishment threatens. The workplace where employees perform only under surveillance. These environments may appear orderly, but they harbor an undercurrent of resistance waiting to surface the moment oversight falters. Consider instead what happens when motivation transcends fear. The artist who creates from inspiration rather than deadline produces work of startling originality. The citizen who acts justly from principle rather than compulsion builds integrity. that remains steadfast even when no one is watching. These people have moved beyond the elementary school of fear into the academy of higher purpose. This distinction reveals itself most clearly in leadership. The leader who rules by fear creates followers who develop cunning rather than character. They become adept at avoiding trouble rather than solving problems, at managing appearances rather than cultivating substance. Their energy diverts towards self-protection rather than collective advancement. Yet the leader who governs through shared values and vision creates something altogether different. Followers who internalize principles and exercise judgment even in the leader's absence. Their motivation springs from alignment rather than avoidance. They navigate by an internal compass rather than external threats. This reveals the fundamental paradox. Power maintained through fear is inherently unstable. The feared leader must constantly demonstrate the capacity to punish, must never show weakness, must suppress rather than resolve dissent. Such vigilance exhausts both the one who fears and the one who is feared. Like a dam holding back a river, it requires constant maintenance against the natural flow of human dignity seeking expression. The wisdom of governance, therefore, lies in transitioning people from fear to reverence, from avoiding what is forbidden to pursuing what is excellent. This transition represents moral maturation, both for people and societies. We may begin by teaching children that certain actions bring punishment, but true education culminates when they understand why those actions are harmful in themselves. This progression from external constraint to internal conviction marks the difference between a functioning society and a flourishing one. Laws may create boundaries through fear of consequence, but only shared values can create genuine community. The former tells you what you cannot do. The latter inspires what you should strive to become. You, who seek to lead others, whether as parent, teacher, manager, or civic leader, must understand this distinction. Begin perhaps with clear boundaries and consequences when necessary, but never end there. Your greater work is cultivating reverence for what is good, not merely fear of what is forbidden. For while fear may temporarily restrain the worst in human nature, only aspiration can summon the best. What people fear, they may obey, but cannot truly love. And without love, for principles, for purpose, for one another, no lasting human enterprise can reach its highest potential. The path beyond fear leads to the only foundation upon which we can build relationships, organizations, and societies worthy of our full humanity. Lesson 6. In a democracy, the poor will have more power than the rich. Democracy stands as humanity's great social experiment, a system where every voice carries equal weight at the ballot box, regardless of wealth or status. Yet within this noble ideal lies a profound mathematical reality. In any society where resources distribute unevenly, those with less will inevitably outnumber those with more. The simple truth reveals democracy's inherent revolutionary potential. The poor, through sheer numerical advantage, can theoretically overcome the influences of wealth. Throughout history, we see this tension playing out. In ancient Athens, where democracy first flourished, wealthy citizens frequently complained about the tyranny of the majority, when their interests were overruled by the more numerous working classes. Similarly, during America's founding era, property requirements for voting reflected the elite's fear of what unbridled majority rule might mean for their holdings. These fears weren't unfounded. They recognized the mathematical inevitability within democratic systems. Yet reality often disappoints. Despite their theoretical advantage, the less wealthy rarely fully leverage their numerical superiority. Why? Because democracy functions not just through votes, but through mechanisms of influence. While the ballot may not distinguish between the banker and the janitor, the systems surrounding elections certainly do. Money fuels campaigns, shapes information channels, and buys access to decision makers. The wealthy, though fewer, often exercise outsized influence through these indirect means. Think of democracy as a game where everyone gets one move per turn, but some players start with resources that allow them to place subtle obstacles in others' paths or create shortcuts for themselves. The rules remain technically equal while the outcomes reflect existing advantages. This explains why democracies frequently implement policies favoring economic minorities, despite the theoretical power of the majority. You can observe this pattern across various issues. Tax policies often benefit the wealthy disproportionately, despite the fact that progressive taxation would seemingly align with majority interests. Environmental regulations frequently accommodate business concerns over public health priorities. Healthcare systems in many democracies continue to favor profit models over universal access, despite polls showing broad support for expanded coverage. This disconnect between democratic theory and practice reveals itself most clearly during periods of extreme inequality. When wealth concentrates dramatically, democratic systems experience strain as the mathematical advantage of the majority intensifies alongside the influence advantage of the wealthy. These periods typically result either in democratic reform movements or in the emergence of populist figures who claim to represent majority interests against elite power. The wisdom in understanding this dynamic isn't about condemning democracy, but recognizing its true nature. A functioning democracy requires acknowledging and addressing the tension between majority rule and influence disparity. The most stable democratic systems historically have been those that find ways to balance these forces, allowing majority interest expression while providing safeguards against both the tyranny of the majority and the domination of wealth. You can see this balance in the most enduring democratic experiments. Systems incorporating proportional representation rather than winner-take. All elections. Robust campaign finance regulations. Independent media ecosystems. Strong civic education programs. These features don't eliminate the mathematical reality that the poor outnumber the rich, but they create conditions where numerical advantage translates more effectively into policy outcomes. For anyone participating in democratic systems, this understanding proves essential. If you count yourself among the economic majority, recognize that your theoretical advantage requires organization and vigilance to manifest. If you find yourself among the privileged minority, understand that sustainable democracy depends on restraint and compromise rather than maximizing influence. And for those building or reforming democratic systems, acknowledge that pretending the tension doesn't exist only guarantees instability. The democratic experiment continues to evolve precisely because this fundamental tension between the power of numbers and the power of resources never fully resolves. Each generation must navigate its own balance point. The wisdom lies not in denying the mathematical reality that the poor will always outnumber the rich in any unequal society, but in creating systems where this unavoidable truth serves as a foundation for balance, rather than a recipe for conflict. Lesson 7. Poet as an imitator of life. The poet, they say, lives twice. In the first life, they observe and absorb the human condition in all its complexity. In the second, they recreate it through the power of words, distilling the essence of our experiences into verses that echo across time. This dual existence reveals the true nature of poetic craft. Imitation. Like the painter who captures the play of light on water or the sculptor who finds form within marble, the poet imitates reality. You must understand that all artistic creation begins with imitation. The poet, standing before the vast panorama of human experience, must choose their subject carefully. There are essentially three paths available. Things as they were or are, things as they are said or thought to be, or things as they ought to be. This trinity of choices defines the boundaries within which all poetic creation occurs. When poets depict things as they were or are, they serve as historians of the human heart. They document reality with unflinching precision, showing you the world as it exists without embellishment. This approach grounds poetry in the tangible, in the witnessed and lived experience. Think of how the epic poets chronicle battles and journeys, or how certain modern verses capture the precise texture of everyday moments. The power here lies in recognition. You see your own reality reflected back at you, crystallized in language that makes the familiar suddenly profound. The second path invites poets to explore things as they are said or thought to be. Here, they venture into the realm of perception, opinion, and subjective truth. Myths, legends, cultural beliefs. These become the raw material for verses that don't merely document reality, but illuminate how humans interpret it. When a poet recounts a folk tale or explores a commonly held belief, they're not concerned with literal truth, but with revealing how stories shape our understanding. This poetry helps you recognize that reality itself is often constructed from the stories we tell about it. The third and perhaps most ambitious path is the imitation of things as they ought to be. Here, poets become visionaries, showing not what is but what could or should be. They craft ideals in verse, inspiring you toward higher possibilities. This is poetry as aspiration, as moral compass. When you encounter such work, you feel not just recognition but longing, a desire to bridge the gap between what is and what might be. The vehicle for all these imitations is, of course, language, that magical medium that transforms thought into shared experience. But not all language serves the poet equally well. Some reach for current terms, the everyday speech that surrounds us, finding beauty in common expression. Others excavate rare words, linguistic treasures buried by time or limited use. And most powerful of all, many wield metaphor, that lightning strike of language that connects disparate realms of experience, creating meaning through unexpected comparison. You can see this in your own response to poetry. When a poet calls love a flame, you understand immediately, though love has no physical temperature. When death becomes a gentle sleep, you grasp the comparison without confusion. These metaphors don't merely describe, they transform your understanding. They are the alchemy by which poets transmute observation into insight. This power of imitation isn't merely aesthetic, it's profoundly human. We learn first by imitation as children, understanding the world by mirroring it. The poet simply refines this natural human tendency to its highest form. Through carefully chosen language, they create imitations so profound that they sometimes seem more real than reality itself. The next time you encounter a poem that moves you, consider which path the poet has chosen. Are they showing you the world as it is, as it's perceived to be, or as it ought to be? Notice the language they've selected, common or rare, literal or metaphorical, and how these choices shape your experience. In doing so, you'll begin to understand not just the craft of poetry, but something essential about how humans translate experience into meaning. For in the end, the poet's imitation is not mere copying, but revelation. Like all great artists, they show us what we've always seen but never truly noticed. They make the invisible visible through the magic of words, proving that language, properly wielded, can capture not just the surface of life, but its deepest currents. Lesson 8. The Virtue of Justice. Justice stands as perhaps humanity's most elusive yet essential virtue. Throughout the ages, we've witnessed how societies rise when justice prevails and crumble when it falters. But what exactly constitutes true justice? Is it simply following laws, or does it demand something deeper from us? Justice, in its purest form, is moderation regulated by wisdom. Think of wisdom as the navigator and moderation as the vessel that carries us between the dangerous extremes of excess and deficiency. When we speak of a just person, we speak of someone who has found balance, someone who gives neither too much nor too little, who claims neither too much nor too little for themselves. Consider how easily justice becomes distorted without wisdom's guiding hand. Laws without wisdom become rigid instruments that may punish the innocent while allowing the cunning to escape. Punishment without wisdom becomes cruelty rather than correction. Distribution without wisdom creates either deprivation or wastefulness. In each case, the absence of wisdom transforms what should be justice into its opposite. But wisdom alone cannot create justice. We need the moderating force that prevents us from swinging to extremes. Even the wisest among us may fall prey to excess, perhaps becoming so fixated on absolute truth that they crush those around them, or so devoted to mercy that they enable harmful behaviors to continue unchecked. Justice requires us to find the middle path, the golden mean between competing values. History has shown repeatedly that those who govern others most effectively have first learned to govern themselves. The ruler who has never experienced discipline becomes a tyrant. The judge who has never faced judgment becomes arbitrary. The teacher who has never been a student becomes dogmatic. There is profound wisdom in the pattern of first submitting to authority before wielding it. This principle extends beyond formal leadership. In any relationship where we hold power, as parents, managers, friends, or citizens, our capacity to use that power justly depends largely on whether we've internalized the proper use of authority by first experiencing its responsible exercise over us. Those who have never been properly ruled often become the most dangerous rulers. You might wonder why some societies seem to produce more just leaders than others. Often, it's because they've created systems where future leaders must first serve in subordinate positions, learning the impact of power by feeling its effects. Think of how military officers first serve as enlisted personnel, how physicians endure residency, or how religious leaders often begin as novices. These structures aren't merely about paying dues. They're about developing the essential understanding that comes only from being on the receiving end of authority. When we examine particularly just people in our communities, we typically find they've experienced formative periods where they learn to submit to proper authority, whether parents, teachers, mentors, or traditions. This experience doesn't break their spirit, but instead cultivates within them an intuitive understanding of how power should be wielded. They know firsthand the difference between authority that uplifts and authority that crushes. Justice in society ultimately mirrors justice in people. Communities where most people have learned moderation through wisdom tend to create systems that reflect these same qualities. Their laws show nuance and balance rather than rigid extremism. Their customs make room for both tradition and innovation. Their distributions of resources reflect neither absolute equality nor unbridled accumulation. The path toward a more just society begins with each of us cultivating this virtue within ourselves. Ask yourself, have you truly learned to be ruled well? Do your decisions reflect moderation guided by wisdom? When you hold power over others, even in small ways, do you exercise it with the same care you would wish from those who hold power over you? Justice isn't simply about following rules or achieving specific outcomes. It's about developing the inner capacity to navigate the complexities of human interaction with both wisdom and restraint. Like all virtues, it develops through practice, through conscious choice, through reflection on our failures, and through the humble recognition that perfect justice exceeds the grasp of any individual or society. Yet in striving for this balance, we move closer to creating relationships, communities, and institutions that allow human flourishing. And perhaps that is justice's ultimate purpose. Not perfect harmony, but the creation of conditions where each person can develop their fullest potential while respecting the same opportunity for others. Lesson 9. No excellent soul is exempt from a mixture of madness. Throughout human history, the most brilliant minds have often walked a fine line between extraordinary insight and what others might call madness. This connection between genius and unconventionality is not merely coincidental, but rather represents a fundamental truth about the nature of exceptional thinking. When you study the lives of history's greatest thinkers, artists, and innovators, you discover a peculiar pattern. Their minds operate differently, sometimes in ways that appear strange or disturbing to their contemporaries. Consider the case of Archimedes, who reportedly ran naked through the streets shouting Eureka. Upon discovering the principle of buoyancy while bathing, his behavior seemed absurd, yet the insight he gained revolutionized physics. This pattern repeats itself across time and disciplines. Van Gogh's emotional turbulence contributed to some of the most moving paintings ever created. Tesla, with his peculiar obsessions and eccentricities, envisioned electrical systems that transformed human civilization. The relationship between brilliance and apparent madness exists for several compelling reasons. First, exceptional minds often see patterns and connections invisible to others. When you perceive what others cannot, your conclusions may seem irrational to them, even when they're ultimately proven correct. Second, creative breakthrough requires breaking from established patterns of thought, a willingness to question what everyone else accepts as given. This mental independence can manifest as social nonconformity, eccentricity, or behavior others find troubling. The intensity with which brilliant minds pursue their interests also separates them from conventional thinkers, where most people divide their attention across various activities and relationships. The exceptional mind often becomes wholly absorbed in specific pursuits, sometimes to the exclusion of basic self-care or social norms. This single-minded focus, while appearing obsessive or unhealthy from the outside, often drives revolutionary discoveries and creations that benefit all of humanity. True creativity emerges from the ability to embrace contradiction, ambiguity, and paradox, mental states that more conventional thinkers find distressing and avoid. The exceptional mind tolerates and even thrives in this cognitive dissonance, finding connections between seemingly unrelated concepts. This comfort with contradiction often extends to emotional extremes as well, with many brilliant people experiencing more intense emotional highs and lows than their peers. While society often celebrates the products of exceptional minds, it frequently misunderstands or marginalizes the people themselves. The very qualities that enable breakthrough thinking, intense focus, questioning of norms, unusual perception, emotional sensitivity, can create difficulties in daily life and relationships. You might admire Einstein's theories while finding his personal eccentricities off-putting, not recognizing that both emerged from the same exceptional cognitive processes. This deep connection between brilliance and unconventionality carries profound implications for how you might think about education, innovation, and mental health. Traditional educational systems often seek to normalize thinking rather than nurture its exceptional qualities. Corporate environments frequently value conformity over the disruptive potential of truly original thought. Even our approach to mental health sometimes pathologizes the very cognitive differences that drive innovation. The line between brilliance and madness is not always clear, and the difference often lies in productivity and context, rather than the unusual thinking itself. When unconventional cognition produces valuable insights, we call it genius. When it creates primarily suffering without apparent benefit, we label it illness. Yet many exceptional people have transformed personal suffering into universal understanding through their work. The most innovative organizations and societies find ways to provide structure and support for exceptional minds without crushing their distinctive qualities. They create environments where unusual thinking can flourish, while providing the stability such minds often need. They recognize that true innovation rarely comes from well-adjusted people who think exactly like everyone else. If you seek to nurture excellence in yourself or others, learn to recognize and value cognitive and emotional differences rather than suppressing them. Create space for intense focus, unusual connections, and periodic retreats from social convention. History's most valuable contributions have often come from minds that appeared, at least initially, to be touched by madness. The greatest human achievements emerge not from perfect mental health as conventionally defined, but from minds able to perceive and create what others cannot yet imagine. Final lesson: for though we love both the truth and our friends, truth stands at the crossroads of our most cherished relationships, challenging us in ways few other virtues can. You've likely found yourself in that uncomfortable position where honesty might wound someone you care about. Perhaps you've withheld a difficult truth to spare a friend's feelings, or maybe you've spoken plainly and watched a relationship wither as a result. This tension between truth and connection represents one of life's most persistent moral dilemmas. The ancients understood this predicament well. When they proclaimed that piety requires us to honor the truth first, they weren't suggesting we abandon compassion. Rather, they recognized that authentic relationships cannot flourish in soil contaminated with deception. You cannot truly love what you do not truly know. When you withhold truth from friends, or they from you, you aren't protecting the relationship but creating a counterfeit version of it. Consider what happens when you discover someone has hidden an important truth for your own good. The revelation often feels like a double betrayal. First, in the content of what was concealed, and second, in the realization that your relationship rested partially on fiction. The foundation cracks, and trust becomes the casualty. You're left wondering what else might be illusory about your connection. Truth-telling in relationships requires tremendous courage. It's far easier to nod along with a friend's self-deception than to risk conflict by speaking honestly. When your friend asks if their harmful behavior is justified, when they seek validation for poor choices, or when they want reassurance that their perception of reality is correct despite evidence to the contrary, these become moments of moral testing. Will you sacrifice truth on the altar of temporary harmony? The paradox here is that by prioritizing comfortable falsehoods over uncomfortable truths, you ultimately undermine the very relationship you hope to preserve. Real friendship cannot survive as a house of cards built on convenient fictions. Eventually, reality asserts itself, and the structure collapses entirely. By contrast, relationships that weather difficult truths emerge stronger, anchored in authentic connection rather than mutual pretense. This doesn't mean truth-telling should be weaponized as bluntness. The manner of delivery matters tremendously. You can speak truth with cruelty or with compassion. The former uses honesty as a bludgeon to elevate oneself, while the latter offers truth as a gift, however difficult it may be to receive. The difference lies not in what is said, but in why and how it's conveyed. In your own life, you've likely witnessed how truth-speaking can transform relationships. Perhaps you've experienced the liberating effect of finally addressing the unspoken tension in a friendship, or the relief that comes when someone cares enough to tell you what you need to hear rather than what you want to hear. These moments, though sometimes painful, create space for genuine growth and connection. Truth also serves as the great equalizer in relationships. When you commit to honesty above comfort, you reject the patronizing notion that others cannot handle reality. You honor their autonomy and dignity by refusing to curate their experience through selective truth. This represents a profound form of respect, seeing others as capable of encountering reality as it is, not as you wish it to be for them. The commitment to truth extends beyond interpersonal relationships to our broader social fabric. A society that prioritizes comfortable narratives over uncomfortable realities becomes increasingly fragile. You see this in political discourse, where tribal loyalty often trumps factual accuracy, in workplaces where speaking truth to power carries career risk, and in communities where inconvenient truths are suppressed to maintain harmony. Each instance represents a choice to value comfort over integrity. Choosing truth doesn't mean becoming tactless or insensitive. Wisdom is required to discern when, how, and which truths need expression. Some matters truly are inconsequential, and kindness might reasonably prevail. But on matters of consequence, where character is formed, decisions are made, and futures are shaped, truth must take precedence. Honoring truth above friendship doesn't diminish the value of connection. It elevates it. By refusing to settle for relationships built on convenient fictions, you create space for connections grounded in what is real. These truth-centered relationships, though sometimes more difficult to maintain, offer something far more valuable than their comfortable counterparts. The opportunity to be fully known and loved not despite this knowledge, but because of it. In the end, prioritizing truth over comfort in your relationships isn't just about ethical living. It's about creating the conditions for the deepest forms of human connection. For only when we are seen and accepted in our full reality, without the distorting lens of pleasing fictions, can we experience the profound relief of authentic love. And that, perhaps, is the greatest truth of all.